Hey guys, this is Doug. I'm here with Brady, and today we're going to be talking all about terrain in Corvus Belli's Infinity game system. Hey
Yep.
guys, welcome back to the internet. This is Doug. I'm here with Brady. Brady, say hello to everybody.
Hello, Internet.
So we're back again, and today we're actually going to be talking about one of the other, in my mind, core pieces of what makes the Infinity game system pretty unique and interesting, and that's all about terrain. So this episode is going to be about how do you set up terrain when you go to play an Infinity game, how should you consider the Infinity terrain is going to be affecting your game state and your list building, and certain things to be aware of during your gameplay that I think personally really affect the actual outcome of the game more so than a lot of other game systems I've played or been a part of. So, I mean, I guess Brady, let's start at the very first part here, right? Beginning is always the best place to start, I suppose. When we're talking about a terrain board in Infinity, Brady, can you talk to us a little bit about how much percentage cover terrain should there be? Should the terrain be symmetrical? Like I know in Warhammer 40,000, for example, obviously your alma mater that you're coming from, Comp REL 40K, they harp a lot on having board states be symmetrical in tournaments, unless it's player placed, right? So is that the same in Infinity? Is it very similar to 40K? Is it totally different? What's your experience been like from a setup perspective, and just seeing a bunch of boards now at this point versus your 40K perspective?
So first and foremost, no, your board should not be symmetrical. One of the jokes in 40K is you win the roll to pick your side, and it's like, cool, this is the least important roll in the game. No one cares. The board is symmetrical. In Infinity, an ideal board actually has that be a choice of whether or not you want to, choose the player initiative order or you want to choose table side. With that being said, when you're building a table, you don't want to make it so one side is so much better than the other that that's not a choice. You want it to be a choice. And so again, if it's too symmetrical, it's not a choice. You always take initiative. Or if one side is too good, then it kind of swings the other way, and you're both trying to win I pick the table side that lets me win the game immediately. I would say a good Infinity board is probably about 75%. That's probably a little bit high. And not all of that should be like big line of sight blocking buildings, like those like big sniper towers and such. You should have a lot of, small barricades and other pieces of terrain that don't block line of sight, but you can use them to get cover. So like, your scatter terrain, your parked cars, your billboards, as well as you want different levels of height. If everything is the same height, if all your buildings are 5 inches tall, let's say 5 inches tall, well, then a sniper on a building will see every other person on a building. Having different heights allows you to, one, get different sniper advantages, which is a nice way of play, but it also allows you to really lean into skills like super jump and climbing plus and other movement abilities. The last thing to consider in an Infinity board, in like a really broad sense, is some missions require to have basically an 8x8 room in the center, which is called an armory building. And some missions specifically call that out. So that is another thing you'll be thinking about is, hey, does this mission require me to have this building in the center of the table? That one goes dead center of the table. So yeah, I would say about 75%, but you want a wide variety of things. I'd probably say no more than 50% of it should be like completely line of sight blocking.
I think that's really good advice. Now, I want to zoom in on one of the things you mentioned here, Brady, because this is so unique for me in terms of the Infinity system, and that's like sniper towers or very tall buildings. And what I've noticed, I mean, I'm an Infinity noob through and through, right? And I'm more asking you what your thought is here. But what I've noticed, at least passively from watching Infinity games on TTS, being at my LGS and just sitting there and watching people play, reviewing lists, reviewing tournament boards, it feels like one of the most important focal points of an Infinity terrain board is often vantage points that you can put snipers onto, or you can put powerful firepower onto to either deny lanes of the board or create just areas that you want to protect via, you know, dissuasion of lots of guns pointed at it. And that in and of itself, from my perspective, has interplayed really interestingly with the ARO system, right? So if you're up there and you can see everyone, but lots of other people can see you, that's also kind of a thing. So I guess my question to you is, what are your thoughts on very tall vantage points on terrain boards and or choke points in terms of creating denial lanes and alleys on maps? When you see an Infinity board, do you ever tend to think about things like that, or are those things that are talked about between the more competitive and more experienced Infinity players when they come to a game and they see the board for the first time and they're thinking about how their list building procedure is going to go? What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so usually you're going to have your lists already made by the time you're coming up to a table to see what the table looks like. However, you usually have two lists, so you can pick which list you're going to go into the opponent with. So that will change based on how you see the terrain. Probably one of the most powerful things you can have in your own deployment zone is a bridge between two buildings, because you can take an entire like 5-man sectorial fire team and stick it up there. They're all covered, they see everything, and that's really powerful and really dangerous for your opponent to deal with. Yes, you 100% are looking at your different fire lanes. One of the things that there's kind of two kinds of quote unquote bad tables that you run into pretty commonly in Infinity. There is the bad table, which is there's just not line of sight blocking, and you're like, oh cool, I wish all my guns were good at 24
bowling ball
plus
world.
inches.
We call that
Yes,
bowling ball
well,
world.
because that one it favors. Yeah, it favors guns that have incredibly long ranges, and that one is like really bad. It's really obvious. You're always shooting and killing each other. Like that one is a really, really obvious one. But then you go to the other side, which is basically like a spaceship. Like, you know, it's so dense and there's so much like big buildings that are blocking lines of sight. Like this is the one kind of I was saying earlier, you should have more than like, you know, maybe 50%, because you still want to have a gun, like, you know, a gun that is good past 24 inches. But some people will really pack those boards so densely that one, a lot of the play space isn't physically usable because you may not be able to get inside some of these buildings depending on how like the manufacturer built the building. But two, it just becomes, oh, I hope you brought shotguns, because your lines of sight maybe go out to 16 inches. And so it's really easy to pick your fights into a way where only short range weapons are useful. The last thing I probably should mention this in like building generally a board, which is again is kind of unique to Infinity, is you should never be able to draw a line of sight from one end of a table to the other end of the table. In a lot of games like 40K, you don't put buildings on the very edges of your table because like who cares? It's the absolute edge of the battlefield. In Infinity, that is not the case. You always want to have like at least line of sight blocking of size 2 are definitely greater. Block it, like, you know, at least in the middle, you know, on the very edges, just so people can't draw lines of sight, because they can be bringing in their drop troopers. And you don't want them to be like, oh, well, it's my deployment zone, it's my back line, they can't get there. It's like, well, no, what if they put a drop trooper down there? Well, then they have complete line of fire to your entire backfield. So that's kind of a unique part of Infinity, where you do need to make sure that you're actually blocking off the edges of the board, because those are actually really powerful sight lines in Infinity.
You make a great point there and a great call out, Brady. Can you think of any other juxtapositions in terms of traditional Warhammer 40K competitive knowledge versus maybe stuff you've had to relearn in the Infinity system? And I'm talking more from like list building, terrain setup, like germane to the conversation we're having here. I thought that was a fascinating point you brought up, so I'm just curious if you have any other things like that that you've kind of picked up on as you've been playing this system.
Yeah, so obviously scatter is a really big deal in Infinity, because you have to be in silhouette contact, or so you have to be essentially base to base with the terrain to get cover and effect from it. So you really need a lot of areas where your people can just touch up into terrain within, you know, like a 4 to 8 inch movement. So you want to have a lot of those, even if they're not fully blocking your line of sight. The other one, and kind of I mentioned it earlier, is ladders and bridges between buildings are just not a thing in 40K, and you see it a lot in Infinity boards because you usually have to spend a lot of movement to climb up a building. And so it's really action intensive, but if you can get up there, you can start moving across bridges using those vantage points. That's a really important aspect of Infinity that you want to encourage players to use.
So you think having higher elevation stuff with large vantage points that you can kind of create another level above the board so that they can move around there is what you're saying? Just because it costs so much AP and so many resources to get up there in the first place, you might as well make it a whole new adventure and a whole new world when you're up there, basically, is what you're saying?
That, and you can also start doing things like, oh, I run up to the building, I climb up it, and then I can attack that sniper fire team that's on the building because I can run across the bridge, where if there's no bridge connecting those two buildings, well, I get up to the building that's blocking line of sight, and well, I can't get any closer to them.
Yeah, that's reasonable.
Because they Infinity also has a concept of, if you have a height differential, you always get cover if you are the higher one. So it just is almost beneficial in a lot of situations just to climb a building, because then you're just getting cover where your opponent may not be. And so having those bridges allows your like shotgun dude or your combi rifle to climb a building, and then they're on the same level and they can run across that bridge and take more space. So those are things I think people really need to think about, and it's easy to forget when you're going to buy or going to like start building your first terrain sets. Is like, oh, I don't need bridges between buildings. It's like, no, those are really helpful. They really change how you want to play the game. It's probably not the most required, but I would say like it elevates a good board to a great board.
Now, I think this is the natural dovetail. You make a good point here. Let's talk about building your first Infinity board. So what I did is I had a table from Big Bear 3D that was one of the old Richard Siegler competitive 40K tables that he printed out, and I kind of bastardized it and I built a bunch of Infinity stuff. And I think now that I'm talking with you, I might actually have to add on a couple of larger multi-tier buildings with bigger walkways. I have like 2 of them, but I actually think after talking to you and having this conversation, Brady, I'm going to try to include a couple more large vantage points in my table build out. But I mean, what have you seen? It feels like Infinity is a game system to me more than a lot of others, where you really kind of do want to have at least one board that you own if you're a fairly serious Infinity player, just because the game does require, like we've talked about, a lot of terrain, and it's really core linked into how the gameplay experience goes, in my opinion. So my take on this after looking into it is like, if you're going to start out Infinity and you really like the game system and you see yourself being a really serious player, you should start to collect your, maybe start with obviously a faction specific first, get your army together, but then the next thing you should get should really just be pieces of a game board, or even just parts you can put together. What are some places that you've seen that people can get game board material from, or are there any common places to go shopping online, Brady, that you can buy good terrain packs or third-party terrain or even first-party terrain from? And how did you do it?
Yeah, I'm building one. I actually was gluing some boards together, some terrain together before this call. So your first party, you can go to Corvus Belli. They sell their older stuff is like a very thin like paper cardboard, kind of like the stuff the boxes are made out of. It's okay. It works. It's very, very cheap, but it will not last physically.
With that, I think that terrain you're talking about is packed up. Yeah, it's like starter terrain, I think.
But like it works. It's cheap and it works. And their more recent stuff is like a more heavy duty cardstock, like cardboard cardstock, and that actually can make a decent table for a fairly low price. I think it is still the cheapest, but again, its biggest problem is it's still a cardboard. It's still like a thick, sturdy cardboard, but it's still, after enough transports, it will start degrading faster than other ones. And then your other options is your third parties. Your 2 big ones that are like kind of, I don't want to say licensed by Infinity, but I think they definitely have a relationship with Corvus Belli, is Warsenal and Microart Studios.
Yeah, I'm literally looking at. I'm looking at Warsenal as you're talking, Brady, and they have the Corvus Belli Infinity logo on all their terrain, so they've got to have some type of professional relationship with these guys, I would assume, right?
Yeah, when I was at Adepticon, they were sharing a booth with them, so like there clearly is a good relationship. Also, like if you look at the ITC mission pack, or the ITS mission pack, they will say like, hey, you need an armory building. Here are places you can go get them. So, and same thing with like tokens and other things. They mention these companies, Microart Studios, Arsenal.
Oh my God,
Corvus
Brady
Belli has a relationship with these companies.
Brady, have you seen the Tsunomata playset with the tech-enabled shrine and the different stone lanterns and the Tsunomata pavilion? It's like a cyberpunk 2077 Asian-inspired shrine table, and it's all War Arsenal terrain. This looks so awesome. Oh my God, this looks so cool.
Warsenal looks really good. It's not most of it's not pre-painted. They do have a pre-painted set coming, or that they've started putting out. It's like the Zhejiang district or something.
Yeah.
But Warsenal is very expensive. I'm not going to beat around the bush there. Warsenal is the most expensive, but it's also the base highest quality. I'd probably say.
Yeah.
I ordered Microart Studios. They have a large selection of pre-colored, pre-printed terrain. So that's what I decided to go for my board. It's also, I'd probably say about 10 to 20% cheaper. It's still a very high quality, but my Warsenal definitely really went to that heavy stylization. The other company that I see a lot of people use that I was looking at a lot was Death Ray Designs or Death Ray Studios.
Those guys make a bunch of BattleTech stuff. Those guys make a bunch of BattleTech.
Yep, they have really great terrain. And theirs is probably the cheapest out of all of them. They have some pretty good starter sets as well. Their starter set has like one huge building that I think is a little bit too big. It's just a little bit too large in all its dimensions, but that one is like a really good cheap set. They have some really good add-ons that I think I'll be looking at. They have some riot barricades that I really like, and a few other like things that hang on buildings and make them look really, really cool.
Yeah,
but those ones don't have any pre-printed or pre-painted.
So they've got a set that I'm looking at here called Mines Corp, and it's a generic industrial park set, and it's $95, and it actually is. It says it's specifically designed for Corvus Belli Infinity, and it looks like it comes with 1, 2 pretty big buildings, and then like 3 or 4 scatter buildings and some terrain. I might actually just buy this exact thing to supplement.
That was the one I was referring to. I think its biggest building is a little bit too big.
It's 10 by 10 by 11. It says 10 by 10 by 11.
Yeah, it's a little bit too big. The other problem I have a little bit with Death Ray and also with Microart is they tend to be a little boxy, and you usually can't get inside the buildings. So it's kind of what I was referring to earlier, where if you have too big, it just takes up area of the board and is essentially a cube that you can't go inside. So it kind of removes that play space unless you have something like Super Jump and can get on, or Climbing Plus, it can just get on top of the building really quickly and easily. But those are all just like fantastic options. And I would recommend that someone start building a table after they get their army. Just because your local gaming store probably doesn't have Infinity terrain laying around, just because Infinity
or the
is
right
a smaller
kind,
game.
Honestly.
Yeah, and like Infinity is a smaller game, so I can't really blame game stores for really like it's smaller game and requires very specific styles of terrain. So I can't blame a gaming store for like, well, if I'm gonna spend my money or ask for donations, I'm just gonna get the really easy to produce and use Games Workshop terrain. So I would recommend a player get their own table. My guess is you can build one for about $100 to $300 if you're paying for the more expensive MDF terrain. Again, Death Ray, Microart, Warsenal. That's actually probably the expense chart. And there's a bunch of other companies that do small things here and there that are all worth looking at, and I would totally recommend looking them up. And you can 3D print Infinity terrain as well.
Yeah. Dude, I'm making a Tsunomata shrine table. I have to. This looks so cool. This is the coolest terrain set I've ever seen in my life. Man, I should have. I've got FOMO on not starting Yungjing now, Yujing instead of Hawk. God, man, this table's gonna be dope. Looks so
My
cool.
buddy has a whole Warsenal Hawk Islam table, and he's about a quarter done painting it, just because again Warsenal packs it with detail, so it's a lot of work to paint.
Do
But
they
it
have
looks
Hawk?
so
Do they have?
good.
Oh, I'm gonna look for Hawk specific buildings now, because I know that one of my ideas for making a Hawk Islam table was I was gonna make one based on the Sand People Star Wars terrain set from Legion, and then like do some
Mhm.
other stuff, and make like a desert outpost themed base. So I was gonna do that, and then I was gonna have the other terrain base that I'm building based off the Big Bear 3D one is a destroyed or bombed out radio and satellite communication station. So it's got like bunkers and pillboxes, and some of them have been bombed out, some of them haven't, or whatever. And that's the board that when you were talking about all the elevation changes and how important it is to have bridges and different layers of the game, I was thinking about, I was thinking in my brain as you were talking. I was actually going through all of these different websites we were talking about, mostly on the War Arsenal website, as you were talking, Brady, trying to match pieces of terrain to what you were saying, which was funny. So this is going to be cool. After we're done shooting this episode, I'm going to like run over to the War Arsenal store like a kid in a Willy Wonka episode and just like spend way too much money on stupid nonsense plastic, basically. All right. I mean, I think this was really helpful for me, Brady. So thank you for coming on and talking to us about the terrain. Is there any closing thoughts that you have that you want to end with? Is there anything that we haven't covered already that you think is just really important for folks that are at the beginning stages of their Infinity journey to understand about the way that the game system and the terrain incorporate with one another? Any closing thoughts on your end?
So it's a minor one, but it's such a gripe that I have is you're gonna have models. Hawk Islam has a lot of them. Morats or another army that has a lot of it, where it has terrain and then it mentions a type, and you have like advantages if you're in that terrain. And it's probably the most abandoned and overlooked rule in the game. So if you're building an army, don't be like, there's totally going to be desert boards and jungle boards. I don't think I've ever seen that rule come up in any of the tournaments I've played, which is very, very unfortunate. So I just wanted to like get on my soapbox for a minute of like, hey guys, build your desert boards, build your jungle boards, enforce it. Make your, and as you're running in tournaments, enforce those rules. They're fun. It reward people for taking those armies. But outside of that, when the biggest thing I would say that people really need to remember for Infinity to make a good board and make people not unhappy, elevation matters a lot less than line of sight blocking. That people are going to remember the tables where they're like, wow, they just had one sniper who could see me no matter where he was because they could just draw line of sight. Every time I moved, 3 arrows triggered, and I had no remorse to it. People will be annoyed if you build Shotgun Alley because everything is, short range sight lines, but they're going to be less annoyed about Shotgun Alley than they are going to be Planet Bowling Ball. So really focus on line of sight blocking. That's in my opinion, that's your first and number one. Elevation is like a secondary. And I probably actually put scatter as a secondary. I put line of sight blocking, scatter so I can actually get cover when I'm seen, and then the third option would be, make sure you have some kind of different elevations so I can use my movement skills and use those, sight lines differently. Those would be the 3 things I'd focus on first, and then like aesthetic, making it look good, and all those kind of things would be like the distant fourth.
And obviously purchasing the Sunomata stairs, pavilion, bridge, lanterns, and shrine specifically from War Arsenal, and sending them to Danger Planet's PO box so that I don't have to pay for this very expensive, awesome looking table. That's your last tip, right? Obviously.
You said it. You said it, not me.
All right, cool. All right, thanks, Brady. This was great. As always, Brady, you're the man. Say goodbye to the internet. Until next time.
Until next time, internet. Goodbye.